And good evening, our fellow listeners and our fellow listeners of our program. This is Federico Lines of States Rights Radio and
Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports. And tonight's episode is a continuing discussion of the Second Amendment, the ATF's continuing intrusion onto the lives of the Second Amendment in our republic. And, tonight we're going to be talking about this, new pistol brace rule that the ATF has been trying to enforce that was supposed to go into effect on May 31st, so that was Wednesday of this week. Luckily for right now, at least, a federal judge from Texas, his name's Drew B. Tipton of the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Texas, granted a preliminary injunction against the rule that the ATF was trying to put in place. That was based on a Gun Owners of America lawsuit. But effectively, this pistol brace rule would have made overnight millions of Americans a felon. And so effectively, basically the pistol stabilizing brace rule was going to force firearm owners who utilize a pistol brace to register their firearm with the federal government, providing a whole bunch of information and biometric data, including their names, address, social security, as well as fingerprints. Or if they didn't register before May 31st, they would have to pay I think it was a $200 tax to exercise their rights. And if they didn't do that, they could face up to 10 years in jail if they were caught with a pistol stabilizing brace. But, like I said, right now it's been, there's an injunction on it, but this is just, the continuing push to criminalize law-abiding Americans.
Yeah, the ATF has never really been a protector of the Second Amendment to law-abiding citizens of the sovereign states in this nation. I don't even know when did the ATF when the ATF was established.
I had to do a little quick research on it, but
was it during Nixon?
Back in like the 20s.
The 20s. Let me also do a little research here. Oh no, it was founded in 1972. I was right by Richard Nixon. Also, I think it was around the same time where Richard Nixon established the DEA. So Richard Nixon, people voted for a man who, again, was just like LBJ, increased the size of the federal government. I think increased it even more than LBJ. And, I think ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms should actually be a store, not an agency. But, the ATF has never really, and neither has the DEA has ever cared about civil rights or civil liberties of the citizens, and just wants to impose and act like the judge and, impose the rules that, it's funny, a German lawyer who worked for the Reich Chancellery in the Second World War, he did not like the secret police, and he mentions that he said in quote that the secret police thinks the laws are like ice cream, easily melting, and that's what the ATF, which is a secret agency, which is an agency of the central government, they don't care about the laws, they don't care about constitutional rights, they just want to impose their rules and be done with it. And sadly, the Supreme Court has been split on this issue. In the 40s, where you had the FDR court, they imposed sanctions. They imposed a rule on the Second Amendment in creating a argument that a well-regulated militia doesn't fit. It was for a regulated militia to be owned of guns, not the citizens. But much years later, in DC versus Heller, they split that, and we're not, and as much as Anton Scalia said, and I agree with his opinion, that the Second Amendment does not deny the right for the military to have weapons, but it also does not deny the citizens to have weapons. And the people's rights should not be infringed by the government, by the militia, by the army. So, the Founding Fathers does not, the framers of the Constitution did not want to give too much rights to the people, but yet they did not want to give less rights to the army, to the military, to the government. But it's more of an equal binding agreement. So people, when I read the Second Amendment, you have to take close of every punctuation, of every grammar, because every punctuation mark, every comma is important in that Second Amendment, and people need to know that. And I've grown to be kind of like a small constitutional scholar, but I can really understand what Scalia and the framers were saying, and Biden's administration, Trump's administration, all the way up down to Richard Nixon. I don't think they never really comprehended or don't care about the Second Amendment. What say you, Seth?
Yeah, well, I think it's safe to say that almost nobody in Washington cares about the Second Amendment or any of our constitutional rights. And you look at the way this is working. The Republicans, for their part in this, there was a group of Republicans in the Judiciary Committee who voted 23-15 to advance a resolution to prevent this, and then the Republican leadership did not allow this to move forward. So the Congress is abdicating its duty and not stepping in, except for a small number of Republicans in the Judiciary Committee. Even in that attempt, it's based on, it kind of just shows how backwards we are, because it's based on the Congressional Review Act that was from the 1990s during, Newt Gingrich's, as part of the Contract with America from Newt Gingrich. And this just kind of shows how backwards we've become, because what it says is it basically admits that, yeah, we're going to let these unelected bureaucrats and these bureaucracies and agencies, almost all of them unconstitutional to begin with, they shouldn't exist. But basically saying, yeah, they can enact whatever rules and regulations they want, and then Congress can step in and review it, which is backwards. Congress should be writing laws first before any bureaucracy, and again, most of these bureaucracies shouldn't exist, but it just totally perverts the way things are supposed to be done. Congress should write laws, and then they get enacted. Instead, the unelected bureaucrats are enacting regulations, and then Congress will review it. This is not the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah, you're right there. Neither the courts or the bureaucracy should be allowed to rewrite or write laws. And yet again, I have a thing with judicial review where the courts take it upon them to review a law and say what's legal or what's constitutional and not. And depending on what the law is and all that, but Congress is the one that, you're right, makes the laws, and then it is up to the courts to review the law. The bureaucrats are part of the executive branch. They're there to enforce the law, whatever the law is, and whether the law is constitutional. They're not, yeah, you're right, they're not there to make it up or review, or, for example, like when They captured the nutcase. He was a very disturbed individual, Ted Kaczynski, and he's a horrible man. I think he's still alive in prison. He damaged a lot of people's lives and all that. But the way that they captured him was the FBI made a chart called linguistics or something along those lines, forensic linguistics or something like that. And, there was no law based on that. So Ted Kaczynski could have walked because there was no set precedence, no set law on that. But, of course, the FBI during the Clinton administration, they decided otherwise and still, found him to be in jail. But that's the problem when you have agencies come in and dictate to rewrite the law or try to incriminate people. And that's a danger to a republic. These organizations, and Trumpers, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, socialists, progressives, they're all one and the same. They all want a form of central government only to benefit them when it needs to. And that's why, I'm not partial to any political party or anything like that, because they're out just for themselves. They want to back the blue when it fits their narrative, but when the blue shoots people on January 6th, oh no, that's murder, that's blah blah blah. No, it's quite simple. You cannot pick and choose, and the Constitution doesn't pick and choose. The Constitution just says what the law is, and that's that.
Yeah, and as as you mentioned earlier about the Second Amendment and looking at the commas and everything, I think it's very clear, that basically I'm under the belief that all gun control laws, especially from the federal level, and we can debate what the states and local governments have the authority to do on this, but I think all gun control laws from the federal level are unconstitutional. And I also, I view the militia as actually everybody. Everybody's part of the militia. It's supposed to be kind of this defense thing. If we're attacked by a foreign entity, everybody should be defending this land. But that's a separate debate. But that's my view, is that the federal government has no authority to regulate gun ownership in any way. And if there's any authority, it's at state and local level, and I'm pretty much against most of what the state and local level does on it, but I'm pretty firm, though, that the federal level has no authority for regulating guns.
You're right there. The federal government, gun control legislation by the federal government, it should be null and void and should be nullified by the states. It is the states who are there to enforce the Second Amendment, not to restrict, but enforce. One example is after the Parkland shooting, the Florida legislature and Governor Rick Scott signed a law saying that they raised the gun age from 18 to 21. I think that's fine. I think that's a reasonable age to have to own a gun. If you make it 45, 50, you are restricting half of a person's age. So that I wouldn't like. But 21, that's fine. It's also a drinking age. Drinking age should be lowered, but that's again. But yet again, the influence of the federal government when it came to drinking age is stupefied to me, and it clears dependency. But that's another topic. But I think states should be able to regulate gun laws in their own state, in their own communities. It's not up to the federal government. That's not what this republic stood for. And in reading the dissent of D.C. versus Heller, Justice John Paul Stevens said that the Second Amendment doesn't give you the right to rob a bank. Well, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. Excuse my language, Seth. No. But of course not, because you are committing a crime. So when did committing a crime gives you the right for the Second Amendment? The Second Amendment. So this is the spin zone that the progressives try to impose. Or a famous interview of Chief Justice Warren Burger, where he actually trashes the Second Amendment. I'm like, whoa, this guy's supposed to be the main protector of the Constitution, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and he's trashing it on Meet the Press or PBS. I forgot which one it was. We've taken a role here that we've really become dependent of the federal government, and they think that, but it's always been like that since 1824, where, we need in their mind, we, the states, need the federal government more than the federal government needs us, and that's the other way around. The federal government needs us to run this country and find progress in this country, not the central government. So, to have, like in the UK or in other countries where you have a universal gun control, that that's the whole point of why this revolution was fought in 1776. That's the whole point of we got away from the UK, Great Britain, was because they were restricting gun ownership because they were afraid that the colonists were going to rebel against the British government, the British Crown. So, this thing of saying, well, in the UK they have less gun deaths and less crime. Yeah, well, they still have crime, not by guns, but they still have crime. And, what good has that? What good has that come of? So, we really have to lay off this dependency of the federal government, even on the Second Amendment.
Yeah, and as we talk about, crime problems, and there are crime problems. There's always going to be crime problems. We live in a fallen world, but the idea that the gun is the problem is, just asinine. It's not the guns. It's a cultural issue, which also a cultural issue that's been created through this dependency. Everybody's dependent on the federal government, and it leaves us with this, poor economic state, and we have a poor education system. There's a lot of things that are the problem, and I think honestly, if we just went back to kind of to liberty, if we let liberty reign in America, I think we'd see a lot of these problems go away rather quickly. It wouldn't happen overnight, but I think that's the solution: is people being accountable for their actions. But owning a gun is not going to make you a criminal unless the ATF gets its way and Joe Biden and Donald Trump get their way, because this pistol brace thing was based on basically a 2021 executive order from Biden, who Biden was emboldened by Donald Trump, who became the first president to ever use executive order for gun control. And that's an issue that really needs to be addressed by those who love Donald Trump. He set the precedent for what Biden's ATF is doing today. Donald Trump did that. If you go back to, when Donald Trump said that, take the guns first, do due process later, it's just so disgusting. It's just that this guy continues to get all this support from people who claim they love the Second Amendment. When it came to that, Donald Trump was talking about how people are just afraid of the NRA, which the NRA is a rather weak organization. It was only groups like Gun Owners of America and the National Association for Gun Rights who were standing up to Donald Trump at the time. People need to kind of get kind of wake up to, the big organization that's supposedly trying to protect our Second Amendments, the NRA, is weak, and look for the groups like Gun Owners of America that will actually put the Second Amendment above politicians.
Yeah, and you mentioned Donald Trump's famous speech of, we'll take the guns first and then due process later. And I go, whoa, wait a minute. And I know the Second Amendment is first, but also you have a Sixth Amendment where you cannot do that. And there's a due process clause in the 14th Amendment, and there's a a trial by jury and all that. But yeah, it's this fascination of these Republicans and Democrats that cheer for this type of nonsense and this type of, not nonsense, of this type of populism that I despise. And I really do despise this demagoguery of populism. And, going back to what you said about crime, yeah, crime is everywhere, and it should not just be, it's not only dependent on gun, because the famous, I don't know who coined this phrase, but guns don't kill people. People kill people. And that's basically, a gun, it's if you see a gun on a desk or on a shelf, it's lifeless. It has no life. It has no meaning. It's just laying there. The same thing with a knife. The same thing with a baseball bat or with a lead pipe. But, somebody picks up those items and they become weapons. They become weapons of destruction. And, people have killed people with knives and bats and lead pipes and guns. So are we here going to ban, just because, and the Second Amendment doesn't really say the type of weapon. It says just the right to bear arms. Now I know Family Guy thought it was the right to the right to hang a pair of bear arms, but that's not what it means. It just said arms. It means that the right of the people to defend themselves with whatever means necessary against an oppressive government. That's what it means. That's what the founders and the framers said. It doesn't specifically say guns. It says anything armed, to arm the people as well as have a regulated military. So this vendetta, the progressives, they did it with tobacco. Now they're doing it with guns. It's futile, and it's changing the narrative, changing the spin story, and it just boggles the mind that people follow that, and then people follow Trump or Biden or Nixon or Reagan or whoever in their rhetoric just to follow somebody because they're popular. It just boggles the mind.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of note, as you talked about, it wasn't specifically guns as the right to keep and bear arms. Now this is just kind of an interesting tidbit in history. This was during the Mexico-Texas dispute and the fight at the Alamo. Obviously at that time, Texas was not an American state. But part of the fight kind of spurred by, Mexico trying to ban the Texans from owning cannons. And so I think that kind of just is a perfect example of what the Second Amendment is there for. It's for us to have a defense mechanism against a tyrannical government, and it's not about hunting. It's not even about personal security, even though that is an aspect of it. But it's ultimately to stop tyrannical government from coming after us. That's something that needs to be understood. We've kind of made the Second Amendment all about sport and hunting, and I come from a hunting family, so I get the appeal to that, but that's not the point of the Second Amendment.
No, and it's you're absolutely right. It's not Second Amendment doesn't give you the right to, go hunt deer or elk or whatever, go hunting, go sportsman, target practicing. It really doesn't, and people. That's the narrative that people are changing. Oh, it's for hunters. Oh, well, you're killing deer. That's so bad. We've really created a spin-off narrative to, frankly, all the amendments per se, but mainly this one. This one has become a spin-off narrative from the left and the right. The right, the NRA, wants to make it about hunting. The left wants to make it about, gun violence and all that. And they're just creating spin-off narratives that we're getting out of focus in what the Second Amendment really means. And, it's about defense, not defend. Of course, defending your home or your property is important, but that's also not. You're right. It's they're losing that narrative, and of course, because they're imposing gun control, in the city of Chicago. Oh, the city of Miami. I remember where, back in '92 here in Miami, criminals were attacking tourists coming out of the airport. And I'll never forget that Channel 10 here in Channel 10 here in South Florida, they interviewed these criminals that were attacking and murdering tourists. And they asked them, why are you doing this? And they were saying, well, because they're not armed. They're coming out of the airport. We know that they're not armed, so we're going to rob them and commit a crime. And I'm not saying you should arm the passengers, but the thing is that the criminals will always find the weaklings of a citizen, and when you restrict gun ownership like that, you're gonna get that type of crime, like you have on the streets of Chicago. Chicago is one of the cities. Well, Seth, you're from there. Chicago is one of the cities that has very strong gun control laws against you, against other citizens, but not the criminals. The criminals are not gonna respect it. They're gonna find guns wherever means necessary. So, that's a narrative that also needs to be pointed to, that, you have gun restrictions because you don't have the Second Amendment, because you want to make it about guns, but then you're creating more crime, a haven of crime on that. And that's something that, the former mayor of Chicago, Lightfoot, and then the daily criminal machine needs to understand that. Rahm Emanuel also needs to understand that too, and here in Florida too, so, and New York and LA. So, it's just sad that, people are going off on these narratives that make no sense but to the people inventing these narratives.
Yeah, it's ultimately a tool of control. The government is just exerting its authority that it's not supposed to have under the Constitution over us. And it didn't. And I want to go back. We've touched on it a bit, but like I said, that the bureaucracies are the ones writing the rules, and this is just not how it's supposed to work. And I'm waiting for where's the Republican politician who is willing to kind of stand up and say, yeah, I'm not even going to discuss, any gun control law, because that's what happens is we get these narratives forced on us, and the Democrats push gun control, and then the Republicans come in and say, well, yeah, we need to do something. We need to regulate somehow, but we don't agree with what the Democrats are doing. And then ultimately a lot of them really do agree with what the Democrats are doing. Where's the Republican politician who's saying that there's nothing we can do from Washington that's going to fix this? We need to stop acting like if we're some type of savior. I mean, the problems need to be addressed at home, locally, and really individually. People need to, take care of their own lives and kind of fix the problems in their own life. And, I don't hear, like I said, the Republicans engage in the debate too, and they say that we need to do something. Well, something does not need to be done every time a tragedy happens. It's in terms of government. The government does not need to be involved in all of these issues. We need to get back to independence and people taking care of their own problems.
Yeah, and one thing I would like to touch on is every time there's a shooting, and of course it's disgraceful that there's a shooting because we want to live in a peaceful society, a peaceful community, so these shootings should not take place. But again, we live in an imperfect nation, an imperfect world, and there's always going to be some mentally deranged individual, a sociopath, that is going to create a terrible crime and kill innocent people. And instead of targeting the largest gun-owning majority people who are not criminals, who are not sociopaths, who are not mentally deranged, if this person gets caught, then he should face trial and he should be found guilty by a jury of his peers. And if he is mentally incapacitated, he should be confined to a mental institution. But that's the thing, is that you cannot predict a crime and you cannot force a crime on somebody else just because of that mentally deranged person. All these, Sandy Hook, the shooting in a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado, Parkland, Florida, and many others, they're from people who are mentally disadvantaged. They are on a spectrum of not normal. Well, some of them remain in jail, have been in jail, have been in prison, or are receiving medical treatment while in prison, and that's fine, and that's by how it's supposed to be. We can't stop every single crime in America because we don't need a thought police. We don't want a thought police. Crimes are going to happen no matter what. It's tragic. Crimes are going to happen, but we need to focus on that crime and make sure it doesn't happen again. But in a way that you don't restrict gun ownership, particularly by the federal government, either through the executive branch or the high court or Congress. You really, that's not the role of the central government, is to impose sanction. If California wants to have stronger regulations on gun control, that's their problem. I'm never going to visit California, probably in my lifetime again. I've been there in 2005. It's beautiful. I liked it, but I don't think I want to go back to California now. But the same thing. I love Illinois too. I love Chicago. Chicago's my favorite city compared to New York. I'll definitely go to Chicago. I'll just have to watch myself. But I'm gonna be vigilant, and that's one thing that people have to be. Is you have to be vigilant. I'm not saying vigilante justice like the Marine that killed that homeless man, or Bernie Getz. I'm not talking about vigilante justice. I'm talking about you have to be vigilant with yourself and your surroundings, and make sure when you're walking around a neighborhood or anywhere that you are vigilant, that nothing happens to you or happens to your neighbors or your fellow citizens.
Yeah, and like you said, the government can't stop all these crimes from happening. And in fact, my view is that the government's not there to stop crimes from happening. It's there to institute justice once crimes have occurred. But if we get back to that understanding that ultimately it's our responsibility to protect ourselves, to defend ourselves against criminals, we'd be in a far better place, because we always have this view of the Wild West, as being this, like gun crazy society. And, the Wild West wasn't so wild, and most people were openly carrying firearms, and it was actually relatively peaceful. Not what we get from the movies. But I think when we have more people exercising their Second Amendment rights, that will go a long way towards stopping crimes from happening. I mean, you look at all of these mass shootings, they're always at gun-free zones. They're always at places where people aren't exercising their Second Amendment rights, and in fact are not allowed, according to their government, to exercise their Second Amendment rights. I mean, if teachers, if administrators in these schools were open carrying during the day, how often would these shootings occur? I don't think they'd occur nearly as much as they are today. So it really, we got to understand what the role of government is. It's not to it's not to stop crime from happening. It's to institute justice once crime has occurred. If we take it upon ourselves to defend ourselves, to be, ready, and again, not vigilante justice, but, you're ready. If you're attacked, you have the right to defend yourself. I think things would be a lot better in this country.
No, you're right, and good point on that, Seth. Where government's not there to stop a crime. It's if a crime will occur, it's the government's responsibility, whether state, local, or sometimes federal. But yet again, we don't want federal to institute justice on that criminal, like the federal government did with Timothy McVeigh or Ted Kaczynski. They did a federal crime, and they were punished for that. Now, the Waco situation, which that was an ATF operation, that was such a screw up operation that I don't know where to begin. That was again the ATF's pounding on their authority that they had to check every house, they had to check on this house that apparently contained guns. I've seen documentaries on Waco, and I don't believe that the Branch Davidians had an armed arsenal. Maybe they had a few guns, but not an armed arsenal, as ATF claimed they had. And it was a real shitstorm that the federal government created. I've always said this in our program, Seth. It is always the federal government that creates these problems. It's never the states. It's never the local. It's always the federal government that creates it. Going back to even before, always trying to impose a set of rules that the federal government wants and really creating a problem. It's always the federal. When you get a meddling federal government, you will have problems. You will have a rise of discontentment, and like it happened in '91 with 91 with Ruby Ridge. That was the Weavers wanted to be away from society until he decided to invest his time in sawing off shotguns, and yet committing a federal crime, even though he didn't want to partake in being part of this country. So shame on him. But it's always the federal government imposing their beliefs onto the citizens of these states that it's not well liked. I mean, like I said, if New York, if California wants to impose gun regulations and want to restrict gun ownership, that's their problem. Then they'll have a high crime rate in LA, Fresno, San Francisco, Sacramento. I mean, that's fine. I mean, Florida does not have gun restrictions. Illinois has gun restrictions, and I sympathize with you. But I mean, it's up to the majority of Illinoisans to get together and get new leadership to unrestrict those restrictions. So it all comes down to individual sovereignty and liberty, and not from the federal government, as we've seen in the 40s with the National Firearms Act, or later on in that, and even before the National Firearms Act, that in 1876, the Supreme Court ruled that African Americans cannot own guns. Here are people that were always prohibited their rights and freedoms, and finally got it. And the Supreme Court said, "Oh no, wait, Black Americans can't have guns." Say again? I mean, they're citizens just like you and I, and they have every right. So it's always the federal government, whether it's the bureaucracy or the court or the Congress or the executive, where they're just meddling where they don't need to meddle.
Yeah, and as we talk about the states as well. I think people would be encouraged to go take a look at your state constitution, because we're talking about the U.S. Constitution, but a lot of state constitutions also limit your government's powers. Here, like you brought up California, I just did a quick search for the California Constitution, and they have the Second Amendment verbatim. They have the right to bear arms in their state constitution. So, there's, the states are not just these. They don't have free power to regulate guns either. They certainly have more authority in the realm of gun control than the federal government, but a lot of state constitutions also say that the state has little power in this area. It really comes down to what do people want? Do you want the government to make you safe? And I would argue the government can never make you safe. And when they act as if they can make you safe, we're worse off. I mean, we end up having the biggest monster becomes the government, not the average criminal. Look, freedom can be dangerous. But I would much rather have dangerous freedom than peaceful slavery. I want to be free. I don't want the government to protect me. I want to protect myself. And I want the government to, have a justice system, a true justice system that punishes actual criminals who have created victims. And that's, really... That's an issue that the American people need to decide. What do we want? Do we want freedom or security? Because if in the words of Benjamin Franklin, if we take security, then we will have neither freedom nor security.
Yeah, and to recap on, you're right, majority of all 50 states, but I'm not sure, but I think a majority of all 50 states, if not all 50 states, do have a Second Amendment provision in their state constitutions. Now, what I meant when I said earlier that states have more power to regulate that Second Amendment than the federal government. Now, when I mentioned Florida with after the Parkland shootings, that the state legislature made it a law that raised the gun age from 18 to 21, that's not restriction, that's regulation. Because if they would have made it to 45 years old, that I would say would constitute restriction, and you're restricting an American citizen up to the age of 45 that he can't own a gun. That would be a constitutional violation and a restriction. But you're right. California does have a Second Amendment language, and they do have the strongest gun control laws. And I would say, in my opinion, they have a lot of restrictive gun control laws. Not regulatory gun control laws, but restrictive. The same thing with Illinois and New York. And you cannot restrict a citizen's rights you can't restrict your First Amendment. They cannot restrict your First Amendment right, as well as they cannot restrict your Second Amendment right, or your Third Amendment, or your Fourth and Fifth and Sixth and Seventh and Eighth and Ninth and 10th. So, they have the power to regulate, but the federal government does not. The federal government, the court needs to understand what the Second Amendment is, or the other amendments. The executive branch needs to enforce what they need to enforce. If an individual has committed a federal crime, that's a different story. Like, we saw with Kaczynski and McVeigh and all those, and the Boston bomber. But states can regulate, but they can't restrict. The Constitution doesn't have restrictions. The Constitution has regulations. And the state has to regulate and enforce, and the federal government has to administer that. But in my final note, I would say that, you need to look up to your state and local government. You need to attend your state local government meetings and talk to your state legislator and tell them what you feel and how you feel about guns. Do you want to be protected by the state, or do you want to be protected by yourself against the government? So get to know your state legislatures, get to know your state legislator, your state representative, and don't focus so much in Congress. Congress is not supposed to get involved in this. Get involved locally, get involved state, and hope you understand more what the Second Amendment is, and that's all. Just get more involved.
Yeah, and don't understand why the Second Amendment exists. I mean, not everybody has to have guns. Some people don't like guns. That's fine, but don't try and take away other people's rights to own guns, because they could be out there and protect you one day. Just kind of get an understanding of why it exists, and it's ultimately there to save us from an overbearing, tyrannical government. And unfortunately, as we found out over the last 3 years with COVID, we have not heeded that warning or heeded that power that we have as people to resist tyranny.
Yeah, you're right. And COVID has made it worse in a more dependent federal government. Again, Trump also created that dependency, and Biden is creating that dependency, and we need to get off on that. And we need to get off on that dependency and start looking out for ourselves.
Yeah, and I, because we've brought up Trump a couple times. I just want to, because it's so infuriating to see this. Like this year at the NRA annual convention, Trump was there, just bloviating as he always does about how he was the greatest pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment president ever. People, wake up. I mean, this guy, they take the guns first, do the due process later. I mean, come on. Stop allowing this guy to lie like this. He was not pro-Second Amendment. He's just a liar. That's so frustrating to see stuff like that. And he gets this huge applause from the NRA convention. It's hard to take sometimes.
Yeah, no, you're right. And people need to wake up to that. But sadly, people are, I like to call them Seinfeld reference. One last thing, the Sunshine Carpet Cleaners. I don't know if you remember that episode of Seinfeld.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, that, it's like a cult. It's like the Sunshine Carpet Cleaners, and they are a bunch of Tanyas. That's the name that Mr. Wilhelm received. His name is Tanya. And they're just a bunch of Tanyas that just go anywhere. And it's sad that, people don't want to see that. You're right. Trump, no Republican, no president has ever been really pro-Second Amendment. No president has ever been that. And, Trump is just being more out there and lying and saying he is Second Amendment, but he really is not. And neither is Biden. I'm not saying Biden is. Nobody who's reached to that level of government will ever support the Constitution as in the local and state community. No one. So don't restrict. You can regulate. Don't restrict my rights. And just be cautious of what you wish for. And again, one thing said, you and I really do agree that Trump is just bad for everything, and he's not a good politician. Well, I don't think he's a politician, but he's just not a good American citizen, and people need to understand that.
Yeah.
So anyway, but do you have any last thoughts, Seth, about the Second Amendment and the ATF and the federal government?
I'll just say, I reiterate, just, desire freedom. Think for yourself, and do not look for politicians to save you. We need to start taking the power away from government.
Yeah, that's true. And with that note, we hope you have a great week. And remember to take care of yourself. Be vigilant. Be independent. Don't be dependent. And we'll all catch you next Sunday at the same time. Have yourself a great night.
Yeah. Good night.